Brothers and sisters in Christ, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Looking at the readings of today and the theme of this week, trusting in divine faithfulness, permit me to invite you to reflect with me on the theme restoration in faithfulness. Dear friends, our first reading presents the fate of the Ark of the Covenant from the time it was taken into battle and was captured by the Philistines to the time when it was returned to Israel and placed in Kiriath Jearim, as we read in 1 Samuel 7, verse 1. The besieging of cities and nations through military conquest was a normal phenomenon throughout the history of Israel. The success or failure of the Israelites in every battle depended on their faithfulness or unfaithfulness to the covenant. This explains the reason we find the Israelites in our first reading going and fetching the Ark of the Covenant to bring it into the battlefield after their first defeat by the Philistines. To Israel, the Ark was the visible sign of God's presence in the midst of his people, as well as a constant reminder of the covenant at Sinai, as outlined in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 to 5. However, despite the presence of the Ark in the battlefield, the Philistines still triumphed over the Israelites. One may be left to ponder, is God defeated? Does God sometimes become so vulnerable that he cannot save himself from being captured by those he had termed other nations? Leviticus 18, verses 28, and Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 2. How many tabernacles around the world are often ramshackled by thieves or mentally disturbed fellows in sacrilegious ways? I remember when I was being met in Cameroon, we were fond of hearing that tabernacles were destroyed, either attacked by thieves, thinking that there is money inside, or by mad people. So every moment we constantly heard of tabernacles in different churches being tampered with. And then sometimes you ask yourself, God is the one present there, but why does he allow this to happen? So is God defeated? The answer to these questions is simply no. God is not and cannot be defeated. He allowed the Ark to be captured in order to make the people of Israel realize their unfaithfulness in keeping his ordinances and to challenge their complacent ideology that despite their actions, God will still fight for them. We too are not different from these people. We always want to try out new things, taking the presence of God, maybe sometimes in our own chapel, and his mercy and protection for granted. Despite their unfaithfulness, the people of Israel recognized always the visible sign of God's presence in their midst, a presence which gave them hope, healing, courage in the battlefield, and reassurance, but also a presence that reminded them of who they are and are supposed to be before God. We find this intertwined understanding of God beautifully expressed in the Gospel passage of Mark in the healing of the leper by Jesus. The leper recognized the saving presence of Jesus, a presence which also reminded him of who he was before Jesus. Unlike the unfaithful Israelites in the first reading, who took the presence of God as a privilege, the leper placed his faith in Jesus by acknowledging his uncleanliness. Recognizing that his restoration was not to be automatic, he expressed his desire to be healed without seeing it as a privilege, but out of God's love. His appeal for healing is then left to what Jesus wishes, not according to his wish. Moved with pity, not because he was a leper, but because of the deep faith which he showed in Jesus with so much humility. Jesus restores him to the covenantal relationship with God and he could now join the worshiping community in performing the rituals and sacrifices prescribed by the law of Moses. Restoration in faithfulness. How complacent are we in the way we live our vows? Do we take for granted that by consecration to religious or apostolic life, we can do whatever we like and still be acceptable before God? Do we take our stages as religious, as priests, as students in formation? Do we see this as privileges, or we see it as a responsibility and a mission? The Israelites only realized that they could bring the ark of God in the battlefield after he had first been defeated by the Philistines. Where was God at the beginning? They trusted in their own power and not in their God who had promised them protection. Ezekiel 33:26. How often do you and I allow our self-esteem, our intellectual capacities, our talents, material possession, power, and self-proclaimed righteousness to overshadow us, taking the place of God in our lives? Do we depend on God only when we are in difficulties like the Israelites? Or do we place our trust in the one who has called us apart to be different like the leper in the gospel? What kind of leprosy is eating each and every one of us up today? Do we need healing? Do we need restoration? The readings of today invite us to be able to look into ourselves and ask our own selves, what leprosy is eating me from within? This man has suffered leprosy for a very long time, but when he met Jesus, he asked him, if you wish, you can make me well. He recognized that on his power, by himself, he could not bring healing to himself. Do you want to be healed? Let us re-examine the place of God as well in our vocation journey. If God was at the beginning, taking up the central place when we first felt his call while aspiring, is he still the vital force in our formation journey? Or do we depend on externalities for survival? The readings of today come as a sentinel for each and every one of us, warning us of the dangers involved in pushing God aside and replacing him with idols. The Israelites suffered greatly for this, and the Shiloh experience became a point of reference by the prophets in calling them to conversion. Jeremiah 26:4-6. We too are bound to the same fate unless we give God a central place in our lives, being faithful to him in order to experience total restoration. To conclude, dear brothers and sisters, permit me therefore to invite us to pray especially for Cameroon and other parts of the world where most political leaders have become semi-gods, and God's name is only used to deceive the people for personal gain through dictatorship. May Our Lady, Queen of Peace and Patroness of Cameroon, intercede for Cameroon, that it may experience restoration, especially with the socio-political crisis which it is facing, and all other turmoils that are plaguing the society. And may our Mother Mary continue to intercede for Cameroon and for each and every one of us in our life journey in following God's ways. Our help is in the name of the Lord. Amen.